I was thrown out of my son's house on a stormy night with nothing but $12 and an old wedding photo. Every step in that rain tore through my chest, not because it was cold, but because my own son watched and said nothing. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, then you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now to follow our deeply emotional story films that will stay with you long after they end. The morning light poured into the upstairs guest room of the hillside villa, painting golden stripes on the whitewashed walls. The room was modest and quiet, too quiet for a house this large. A small framed photo sat beside the bed. Its corners yellowed its image worn by time Grace and her late husband arms linked on the windy shores of Santa Clara Beach, squinting into the sun. Her smile back then was radiant, untouched by bitterness. She barely recognized it now. Grace Anderson had once dreamed that life at 60 would be simple. Not luxurious, not extravagant, just simple. A sunlit kitchen of her own. A chair that rocked beside a garden she tended. Sunday mornings with church bells, the smell of cinnamon bread in the oven. Instead, her life had narrowed to a single upstairs room, a photo from the past, and a hollow ache that no medicine could reach. After her husband passed from a heart attack 3 years ago, Grace sold their house in the countryside. Her son Daniel Anderson had urged her to move in with him and his wife. "Mom, don't be alone," he had said after the funeral. "The kids adore you. There's always space for you with us." She had wanted to believe him. Now, 3 years later, space meant a narrow twin bed in the guest room and days filled with silent labor. The large house with its echoing halls and open-plan kitchen belonged to Vanessa, Daniel's wife. She moved through it like a queen, all sharp heels and sharper glances. Grace's world existed around Vanessa's schedule. "Grandma," a voice called from downstairs. "Been the oldest twin by a handful of minutes. We're out of milk again." Grace sat up slowly, her joints crackling. Her knees always hurt more on humid mornings. She slid her feet into slippers and reached for her cardigan. The house felt colder lately, though the thermostat was always set high. Down in the kitchen, the chaos had already begun. The twins were bouncing from counter to counter, the fridge door wide open, cereal spilling across the marble island. Tablets blared with cartoons. The dog barked once ignored. Vanessa stood near the stove, a Bluetooth earpiece nestled under her sleek honey-blonde bob. Her voice was clipped, impatient. "I don't care what the numbers say. Tell marketing to fix it." She snapped into the receiver. Her eyes met Grace's for a split second. "You took your time." "I'll make some oatmeal," Grace offered quietly, already reaching for the oats and cinnamon. "Just not too bland, please," Vanessa said, flicking her manicured nails against the side of her coffee mug. "The kids won't touch it if it's like paste again." She turned back to her call without waiting for a response. Grace didn't mind the cooking. She didn't even mind the errands. But it was the tone, the dismissiveness, the way please sounded like a command, the way Vanessa had perfected the art of never making eye contact, never acknowledging Grace beyond a task list. It wasn't always like this. In the early days when Grace first moved in, Vanessa was cordial if not warm. But that wore off fast. There was no yelling, no overt cruelty, just absence, a kind of cold civility that hung in the air like perfume, expensive, artificial, and designed to mask something rotten underneath. As she stirred the oatmeal and sliced bananas for Lily, Grace caught sight of the to-do list magnetized to the fridge. Pick up Lily's ballet shoes, 30, clean playroom, fold laundry, confirm dog grooming appointment, dinner salmon or chicken piccata. None of it was hers, all of it was hers to do. By the time Vanessa breezed out the door in her ivory trench coat and designer heels, Grace had packed the twins' lunches, cleaned up breakfast, and restocked the milk from the garage freezer. "I'll be back around 6, Vanessa said, grabbing her keys. "The house is a mess, by the way, and don't forget Lily's art supplies." Grace nodded, but Vanessa was already gone. Daniel didn't see this part of the day. When he came home, she would smile. Vanessa would smile. The kids would rush in, hugging his knees, chattering. Grace would stand in the background, invisible. Daniel would thank her absently as he scrolled through his phone. He never asked what she did all day, never noticed how much of it revolved around filling the cracks in their home life. He wasn't cruel, just busy, just blind. Midday came and went. Grace cleaned the playroom, swept the kitchen, reheated lunch, organized the closets Vanessa insisted were cluttered. Her back ached. Her ankles swelled. She took 2 ibuprofen and drank a cup of peppermint tea, but her heart felt heavier than her limbs. Around 3 o'clock, she sat for the first time since breakfast. The twins were upstairs napping after story time. She'd read them The Giving Tree, her favorite. She folded a tiny blanket with slow, deliberate care. Then she heard it. Vanessa's voice, low and amused, drifted in through the slightly ajar patio door. She was on a call. Again. Grace wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the voice carried clearly into the hallway. Honestly, living with this old lady is exhausting. Vanessa laughed. She moves like molasses, doesn't know how to use a microwave, and I swear I'm constantly redoing everything she touches. Daniel thinks it's sweet, but if she wasn't free labor, I'd have sent her to one of those senior apartments months ago. Silence. Grace stood frozen. The words didn't explode. They didn't scream. They slid like ice down her spine, slow, cold, invasive. She felt them seep into the marrow of her dignity. Free labor. That's what she had become. Not a mother-in-law, not a grandma, not even a person. Just a convenience. She didn't finish folding the blanket. Her hands trembled too much. She walked back upstairs slowly, carefully, like someone who had just stepped off a ledge and was still waiting to hit the ground. That night, dinner was lemon chicken and mashed potatoes. Comfort food. She plated it with care, even garnished the plates with parsley. Vanessa picked at hers. Too dry. Grace didn't reply. Daniel looked up briefly from his phone. "It's fine, Mom. Thanks." He didn't look at her again. After dinner, she did the dishes alone. The twins had already run off to play video games. Vanessa was watching something on her iPad with her headphones on. Daniel had retreated to his office for a Zoom call. No one noticed her. No one said goodnight. In her room, Grace took the photograph from her nightstand and held it in her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared at that younger version of herself, barefoot in the sand, beside the man who used to say, "If anyone ever makes you feel small, they don't deserve you." She whispered into the stillness, "Robert, if you were still here, you wouldn't have let me become a stranger in my own family." And the silence, deep and complete, had no answer. It started with a phone call, the kind that changes everything. Grace had just finished sorting the twins' laundry-matching socks, folding cotton shirts so small they barely felt real in her aging hands. Upstairs, Ben and Lily were shrieking at some cartoon, their laughter echoing down the staircase. It was almost peaceful. Almost. Then Vanessa's heels clicked violently across the hallway tiles. Daniel, her voice rang like an alarm bell. "The Morgan deal, it's gone. The documents were never sent. No one forwarded the updated proposal." Grace stood frozen in the laundry room, a towel still damp in her hand. Vanessa's voice grew sharper. "Don't tell me marketing dropped the ball. I checked the computer last night. Someone deleted the sent email." Another pause. "Of course I didn't delete it. I haven't touched your laptop in weeks, but you know who has." Grace's stomach sank. By the time Daniel arrived home early for once, the house felt electrified. Vanessa paced in the living room, arms crossed, tension radiating off her in waves. Daniel looked exhausted before he even opened his mouth. "Mom," he said gently. Too gently. "Can we talk for a second?" Grace knew that tone. She'd used it herself when Daniel had broken the neighbor's window with a baseball at 12, when he'd confessed he'd failed his first college exam. It was a tone people used when they were about to drop a weight on you and hoped you'd cushion the fall. She followed him into the study. Vanessa didn't come in. That more than anything told Grace the verdict had already been decided. "There's been an issue at work." Daniel started, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. "Vanessa had a critical file open on my laptop. It was an email with our final proposal, $20 million on the line. It disappeared." Grace didn't say anything. Daniel cleared his throat. "We checked the computer logs. It was accessed yesterday, around 8 p.m. Grace frowned. "I didn't touch your computer." "I know," Daniel said, then hesitated. "But Vanessa said she left it on the kitchen counter." Grace remembered that night. She had passed by cleaning up after dinner. The laptop had been closed. She'd wiped the counter. But she hadn't opened anything. She barely knew how to operate a browser. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I would never go through your work, and I certainly wouldn't delete something." He nodded, but it wasn't belief. It was appeasement. A let's not fight gesture. A this is hard enough shrug. Vanessa's voice cut through the hallway again. "Ask her about the login at 8:07. Go ahead." Daniel winced. "You're saying I ruined your deal?" Grace asked, her voice shaking. "No one's saying that," he said immediately. "We just need to understand what happened." "Your wife is saying it," Grace said. "She always says things and you pretend she doesn't." Daniel exhaled and looked down. "Just maybe you should take a few days. Give everyone space to sort this out. You know, until things calm down." Grace blinked. "A few days," she echoed. "I'll pay for a hotel," Daniel said quickly. "Or maybe go visit Aunt Marla in San Jose. You need a break anyway, right? You've been working so hard with the kids. It'll be good for everyone." Grace felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger, not sadness, something colder. The same feeling she'd had at her husband's funeral, standing beside the casket, while people asked her what she was going to do next, as if she were a logistics problem instead of a grieving widow. She didn't scream, didn't argue. "I'll pack my things," she said simply. Daniel opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to thank her, but he said nothing. Outside, the sky cracked open. Rain began to fall in heavy, punishing sheets, drumming against the windows like applause for a performance Grace didn't audition for. In her small upstairs room, she moved slowly. She pulled a weathered suitcase from under the bed and filled it with the essentials: 3 blouses, 2 pairs of slacks, her scarf, her arthritis medicine. She wrapped the photo from Santa Clara Beach in a sweater and tucked it inside like it was gold. Downstairs, Vanessa waited. She didn't look smug. That would have required acknowledgement. Instead, she looked bored, impatient. "I've left you some money on the counter," she said without looking up from her phone. "Should cover a night somewhere until Daniel figures things out." Grace said nothing. Her hands clutched the suitcase handle so tightly her knuckles whitened. Ben and Lily stood in the hallway in their pajamas, blinking in confusion. "Where's Grandma going?" Lily asked. "She's taking a little trip," Vanessa answered sweetly. "Just a few days, sweetie." Grace stepped forward instinctively, reaching for a hug, but Vanessa blocked her with a casual, sterile wave. "You're sick, remember? We can't risk the kids catching anything." The words stung more than they should have. As if being falsely blamed wasn't enough, now she was a health hazard too. "I'm not sick," Grace said softly, but no one was listening. She stepped outside. The rain was relentless now, soaking through her cardigan within seconds. The umbrella Vanessa had offered was nowhere in sight. It didn't matter. Grace didn't ask for it, didn't ask for anything anymore. She walked slowly, her suitcase trailing behind like a wounded dog. The wheels snagged on cracks in the sidewalk. Her shoes were thin-soled and instantly soaked. Water dripped from her hair into her eyes, and her breath came out in frosted puffs. The lights of the city blurred behind a curtain of water. Headlights streaked by. Cars honked. People bustled under awnings, ducking into shops and restaurants. No one saw her. No one stopped. The pain in her knees worsened with every step. The night was cold, too cold for spring. She turned down Maple Street, then again past the corner gas station. She didn't know where she was going, just that she couldn't go back. She passed a group of teenagers huddled under a bus stop shelter. One of them laughed as she walked by, muttering something about crazy old women. Grace kept walking. The suitcase was heavier now. Or maybe her arms were just tired of carrying everything on her own. At the intersection of 5th and Carter, her legs gave out. She stumbled forward, catching herself against a metal bench. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her chest burned. Her head throbbed. Somewhere deep in her lungs, a cough started to rise and refused to stop. She bent over, hacking into the crook of her elbow, rainwater mixing with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. Her body shook. A couple walked past with an umbrella, quickening their pace. No one asked if she was okay. She sat down on the bench, the suitcase beside her, the photo inside. Her life now reduced to this: a wet suitcase, a broken body, and $300 in cash, folded inside a Ziploc bag in her pocket. That's when the laugh bubbled up. Not joyful, not sane, just a jagged edge of something sharp inside her that finally cracked. "This is how it ends, huh?" she whispered to no one. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. In the distance, a car horn blared. A siren wailed. The world moved on. She didn't. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. She didn't know it then, not sitting on that bench in the rain, not coughing until her ribs ached. But this was the end of her old life, and the beginning of something entirely new. The rain hadn't let up. It came down in thick, silvery sheets that shimmered under the glow of street lamps, swallowing the world in cold and blur. Grace Anderson moved like a ghost along the edge of Carter Boulevard, one hand gripping the handle of her suitcase, the other clutched against her chest, as if trying to keep her heart from cracking wide open. Her cardigan was soaked through, her soaked shoes squished with each step. The pain in her knees was numbing now, not from healing, but from resignation. Her cough came in bursts, dry and burning. She should have stopped, should have found shelter, but where a public library closed hours ago. The motel down the block looked like the kind of place she'd only enter if she'd truly given up. So she walked. At the intersection near the bus depot, something made her stop. A shape, a movement, no, the absence of it. There, slumped on the ground near the bench under the flickering street lamp, was an old man, not sleeping, not resting, collapsed. At first, she thought she was imagining it. The rain distorted everything vision sound time. But then she saw his hand twitch, his body shiver involuntarily. His gray overcoat was clinging to his body like wet paper. His glasses lay cracked beside him on the sidewalk. Cars passed, people passed. No one stopped. Grace looked around. 2 teenagers under the awning of a nearby shop saw him too. One looked away. The other shrugged and went back to scrolling on his phone. Grace didn't hesitate. She rushed toward him, her suitcase bumping and clattering behind her. Kneeling was agony, but she did it anyway. "Sir!" she called out. "Sir, can you hear me?" His lips were blue, his eyes barely open. "Cold," he mumbled the word like a feather in the wind. Grace took off her cardigan and wrapped it over his chest, shielding him as best she could from the rain. She fumbled for her phone, thankfully still dry in her pocket, and dialed 911. "This is Grace Anderson," she told the dispatcher. "I found a man collapsed at the 4th Street bus shelter. He's elderly, unresponsive, and freezing. Help was on the way, but time had slowed." Her teeth chattered. Her hair clung to her scalp. She crouched beside the man, rubbing his arm to keep his blood moving, whispering the same words she used to say to her son after nightmares. "You're not alone. Help is coming. Just stay with me." When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics moved fast, checking vitals, wrapping blankets, calling in vitals to the ER. Before they lifted him into the vehicle, Grace stuffed his cracked glasses into her pocket. Something about them felt sacred. "You're coming too, ma'am," one of them said, seeing how pale she'd gone. "No," Grace protested weakly. "I'm fine. He needs it more." "You're soaking wet and you're burning up," the paramedic replied. "You collapse, you'll be next." She didn't argue after that. At the hospital, it was hours of beeping machines, fluorescent lights, and waiting rooms that smelled like antiseptic and rain. She sat in a chair with a hospital blanket draped over her, clutching a styrofoam cup of tea she couldn't taste. The nurses tried to send her home, but she insisted on staying. "He was alone," she said. "He doesn't even have his glasses." Around 1:40 a.m., a nurse tapped her shoulder. "He's awake." Grace stood slowly, joints stiff from the cold and stillness. In room 312, the man lay in a narrow bed, pale but lucid. His eyes met hers. "You're the woman from the street," he said, voice raspy. Grace smiled. "And you're the man who scared me half to death." A pause. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I don't know how long I was lying there." "Too long," Grace replied, taking the chair beside his bed. He shifted slightly, grimacing. "My name's Thomas Hartwell." She froze. She'd heard that name before. Thomas Hartwell, chairman and founder of the Hartwell Foundation, billionaire philanthropist, real estate mogul, the kind of man whose face showed up in newspapers next to headlines about global clean water initiatives, charitable grants, and high-profile mergers. He watched her expression shift and gave a tired smile. "That's the one." Grace shook her head in disbelief. "You're him." "I was," he said. "These days I'm just a tired old man who shouldn't have walked 5 blocks without his heart meds." She let out a shaky laugh, a hand flying to her mouth. "I thought I was having a breakdown. Now I find out I saved Santa Clara's own Andrew Carnegie." He chuckled. I wouldn't go that far. Why were you out there? She asked gently. Needed air, he said. Didn't want a driver. Didn't want the attention. I was angry. My board pushed through a proposal I didn't approve. My name's still on the paperwork, but these days they treat me like a relic. I walked out of the meeting, stormed into the street, and forgot I hadn't eaten. Stormed into the rain, she raised an eyebrow. Pride's a hell of a drug, he said with a grin. She nodded, slowly understanding more than she let on. Your family must be worried sick, she offered. He looked away. I lost my wife 2 years ago. My daughter lives in Boston, sends postcards. I have staff assistants. But no one really sees me anymore. Something about the way he said it struck a deep chord in Grace. She felt her throat tighten. I know what that feels like, she whispered, to be needed but never really seen. They sat in silence for a moment. Rain tapped gently against the windows now, softer, calmer, as if it too was listening. When the nurse came in to check on him, Grace stood to leave. You should rest, she said, and I should figure out where I'm going. Thomas looked at her closely. You're not going home, he asked. Grace hesitated. I don't really have one at the moment. What do you mean? I was staying with my son. His wife. They think I ruined a business deal. I didn't. But they needed someone to blame. She smiled bitterly. So I'm out. Just me, this suitcase, and a photo of my husband. Thomas blinked. You helped a stranger in the pouring rain while sick and alone. Someone had to. He nodded, a strange light in his eyes. You work, he asked. I used to. Raised my son. Managed a household. Cooked for a family. Tended a garden. Nursed through flu seasons and heartbreaks. That sounds like 10 jobs, he said. None of them paid, she added wryly. He looked at her for a long time, then reached for the nurse's call button. Tomorrow morning, he said. Come see me again before you leave. Grace did. At 9:00 a.m., still achy and wrapped in borrowed clothes, she found him sitting upright reviewing documents on a tablet. You said you like to cook, he asked. I do. Still got a green thumb. I grew the best basil in Santa Clara, she smiled. He studied her a moment longer. I want to make you an offer, he said. Come work at my estate. Nothing glamorous. Start with the kitchen, maybe the garden. Eventually, there's a medicinal herb section no one's managed properly in years. The staff won't admit it, but they're terrified of touching anything organic. Grace stared. Why would you? Because I've been surrounded by people who want something from me for decades. You're the first person in a very long time who helped me without knowing who I was. Grace blinked back, a sudden sting in her eyes. I can't offer you millions, he added. But I can offer you dignity. A room of your own, food you'll cook, a space you'll tend, and people who won't talk down to you. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Are you sure? She finally said. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And just like that, with no contracts, no suits, no formalities, Grace Anderson's new life began. Not with lightning, not with triumph, but with rain kindness and a stranger's outstretched hand. The Hartwell estate didn't resemble a mansion so much as it resembled a world. Grace stood beneath the carved stone archway of the main gate, suitcase in hand, still unsure whether she'd stepped into a dream or a story that wasn't hers. The house stretched across a gentle slope above the valley, its ivy-lined balconies and sun-drenched courtyards glowing gold in the late morning light. A week had passed since the night she found Thomas Hartwell crumpled on the sidewalk. A week since she left behind the cold corridors of Hillside Villa and the taste of betrayal that still sometimes bloomed bitter at the back of her throat. But this was something else. The estate manager, a sharply dressed woman named Margot, greeted her at the entrance with a smile that was neither performative nor polite, but warm, real. Welcome home, Ms. Anderson, she said simply. The staff has been expecting you. Home. No one had said that word to her in a long time. Inside, the halls were wide and bright, filled with sunlight and the scent of lemon and rosemary. Paintings hung along the walls, not of ancestors or ego, but of landscapes, abstract forms, even a framed photo of Thomas planting a tree with schoolchildren. Her room was on the east side of the estate. It wasn't large or ornate, but it was hers. A bay window faced the morning sun. A small writing desk sat near the shelves stacked with books. The bedspread was a soft quilt in a shade of pale green, and in the corner stood a tall ficus plant, already growing toward the light. Grace unpacked slowly, arranging her few clothes in the drawers, placing the Santa Clara Beach photo on the nightstand, smoothing out her scarf over the chair. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about sharing space. She didn't have to wonder if someone else would rearrange her things, critique her tastes, or sigh when she entered a room. Here her presence was expected. By the third day she'd found a rhythm. She rose early before the kitchen bustled to life and made her way to the garden. The Hartwell estate grounds were vast, but Grace gravitated toward the neglected southern corner where the herb garden had once thrived. Thomas had been right. No one wanted to touch the medicinal beds. Everything had grown wild, untamed. Lavender bushes tangled with lemon balm, creeping thyme overtaking the footpaths. But underneath the chaos was potential beauty trying to breathe. Grace rolled up her sleeves, tied back her hair, and got to work. The kitchen staff welcomed her like they'd been waiting for her all along. At first, she only helped prep chopping, measuring, overseeing sauces. But it didn't take long for her natural leadership to show. She moved like someone who had spent decades orchestrating meals, not with recipes but instinct. "You know," said Damien, the head chef, one afternoon, as she effortlessly corrected the temperature of a tricky bechamel. "They said you'd be good, but they didn't say you'd be magic." She smiled, modest but pleased. It had been so long since someone valued her touch. It was around the end of her first week that Thomas invited her for tea on the veranda. He sat wrapped in a shawl, the breeze rustling his silver hair. "You've settled in well." "It's peaceful here," Grace said, "and everyone's been generous." "They respect you," Thomas replied, "and you've earned it in record time." She shrugged. "I just do what I know." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "I have another offer." She hesitated, then nodded for him to continue. "I've watched you. You don't just work, you care. And I need that kind of care at the Hartwell Foundation. Our philanthropic wing has gone hollow, numbers instead of faces. I want you to help me rebuild that, organize field efforts, direct real outreach. It'll start small relief drives, support centers, shelters. But if it works, it'll become permanent." Grace blinked. "You want me to lead it?" she asked. "I want you to guide it," Thomas clarified. "Bring humanity back into something that's lost its soul." She didn't answer right away. Her chest was tight, not from fear but awe. "I don't have a degree," she said quietly. "I've never managed a team. I've never been paid for anything I did." He reached for a folder at his side, opened it, and handed her a printed sheet. It was a mock-up of a new initiative, Grace Project Rebuilding with Compassion. Her eyes welled. Thomas smiled. "You've done more for people in your life than most CEOs I've met. Titles don't matter. Character does." By the end of the month, Grace was no longer just the new kitchen helper. The staff started calling her something new, affectionate, admiring. "Little lady," they'd say with a grin. "La Señora," Madame Grace. But one name stuck, the Lady of the Garden, because every afternoon without fail, she returned to the medicinal herb beds, tending the earth like it was her breath. She clipped rosemary with precision, rescued half-wilted chamomile, nursed old lemon trees back to fruiting. It was there between planting and pruning that she began to find herself again. She bought a leather-bound notebook from a local shop and started journaling at night. Not just entries about her day, but memories she thought were gone. Her husband's laugh when he fixed the leaky sink with duct tape. Daniel's first piano recital, the way her own mother used to hum while darning socks. She asked the estate's IT manager to teach her how to use a laptop. Within days, she was typing slowly, painstakingly emails to shelter coordinators, letters to local women's centers, outlines for relief campaigns. She emailed her first blog post into the foundation's internal newsletter, Why Dignity Matters. It went viral. Staff from the top floor came down to thank her. Donors quoted her in board meetings. Journalists asked for interviews. Grace didn't seek the spotlight. She only wanted to remind people that behind every grant proposal, every spreadsheet, every plan, there were humans, struggling, waiting, hoping, and slowly people began to listen. In that new world, she was more than useful. She was necessary. There was one morning about 6 weeks in, when Grace stood on the porch of the outreach center, being renovated in Eastwood, overseeing volunteers as they loaded hygiene kits into vans. The sky was overcast, the breeze cool. Children played on the sidewalk. A young mother offered Grace a steaming cup of tea from a thermos. "You're the lady in the article?" the woman said shyly. "The one who said we all deserve to be seen." Grace smiled. "No," she said. "I'm the lady who finally started seeing herself." And she meant it. For the first time in decades, Grace didn't define herself by what others needed from her. She was more than the babysitter, the cook, the invisible presence in someone else's home. She was Grace Anderson, and she was blooming. It started with a photograph. Grace Anderson hadn't even known it had been taken. She'd been standing beside a food truck in Eastwood, hair tucked back in a scarf, clipboard in hand, laughing as a boy smeared peanut butter on his cheek instead of his sandwich. A volunteer named Lana, a college student with pink braids and a Nikon camera slung over her shoulder, snapped it from across the street. The next day, the image went live on the Hartwell Foundation's website under the headline, "The Woman Behind the Warmth." By noon, it had been reposted dozens of times. By evening, it had made the rounds on a local lifestyle blog. And by the end of the week, it had hit national news. A 60-something woman with silver hair and a fire in her heart, one outlet called her. From forgotten mother-in-law to the face of compassion, another declared. Grace stared at the screen the first time she saw it. There she was, frown lines, crow's feet, the tired curve of her shoulders, and yet she looked alive. Not polished, not posed, but real, strong, kind. "I didn't expect all this," she murmured to Thomas Hartwell, who stood behind her sipping coffee. "I did," he said simply. "People are starving for sincerity. And you're the most sincere person I know." What came next was a wave. Emails flooded the foundation, phone calls, invitations. "We read her quote and we cried," said one message from a single mother in Nebraska. "My mother sent me this article with a post-it that said, 'You see, it's not too late,'" said another. The quote that had gone viral came from her speech at a relief drive in a flood-stricken town upstate. She hadn't meant to give a speech at all, just say a few words to thank the volunteers. But someone handed her a mic, and the words came from somewhere deeper than her lungs. "I don't need anyone to take care of me," she'd said, voice quiet but unwavering. "I need to be respected." The words hit something in people. Like a stone thrown into still water, they rippled outward, reaching those who had never heard of Grace Anderson, never volunteered a day in their life, never thought much about dignity until it was stripped from them. Soon women's groups from across the country started reaching out. One from Portland wrote, "Would you be willing to share your story at our summit? Your voice is what we've been missing." Another from Atlanta said, "We're launching a mentorship program for women over 50 re-entering the workforce. Would you speak at our opening ceremony?" At first, Grace hesitated. The idea of standing behind a podium, of staring into a sea of faces, expecting wisdom, terrified her. She wasn't a speaker. She wasn't even used to being heard. But Thomas nudged her. "Tell them the truth," he said. "That's all you ever need to do." So she did. Her first public talk was at a community center in Sacramento. There were folding chairs, flickering lights, and a podium that smelled of lemon oil. She wore her simplest navy dress and a pearl necklace that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't prepare a script. She simply told her story, about being unseen in a home full of people, about standing in the rain with a suitcase and nowhere to go, about saving a man who in return offered her not charity but choice. And then the line that silenced the room, "I spent too many years thinking I needed to be useful to be loved. I've learned since that love, real love, sees you even when you're still." Women cried. Men stood. A teenage girl in the front row mouthed the words to herself again and again. "Even when you're still." That night Grace didn't sleep, not because she was anxious, but because something had opened inside her, a gate she didn't know existed. A voice that had long been whispering finally allowed to speak aloud. More invitations followed. She traveled to Denver, Houston, Chicago. Sometimes the crowds were 50, sometimes 500. She spoke in churches and libraries, at universities and city halls. She never used notes. She didn't need to. Her story was carved into her. At one event in New York, a young reporter asked her backstage, "Do you consider yourself an activist now?" Grace laughed. "I consider myself a woman who finally decided she deserves a seat at the table. If that's activism, so be it." Thomas watched her rise with quiet pride. One morning after a particularly emotional radio interview, he asked her to join him in the library. He was seated at a round mahogany table, legal documents spread out in front of him. "I want to create something," he said. "Permanent, enduring. Not just my name on another building or scholarship. I want to create a foundation that breathes like you do." She blinked, not understanding. He slid a folder toward her. "The Grace Initiative." Inside were preliminary plans for a nonprofit focused on supporting women aged 50 and above, those re-entering the workforce, recovering from abuse, navigating housing insecurity, or simply reclaiming their place in a world that tried to make them invisible. "I want it to be yours," he said. "Your vision, your name." Grace's hands trembled as she touched the paper. "I don't know how to run something like this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he said, smiling. "You learn, you lead, you surround yourself with people who believe in the fire you carry." She didn't cry, not right then. She waited until she was alone, sitting at her writing desk, as sunlight poured across the floor, and wept not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, of being chosen, not for her sacrifice or her servitude, but for her mind, her soul. In the months that followed, the Grace Initiative launched its first pilot program, providing transitional housing and career counseling for older women displaced by domestic conflict or financial abandonment. Grace personally visited each of the 5 centers. She sat with women in shelters. She listened to their stories not as case studies, but as chapters of lives still being written. One woman told her, "I haven't felt safe since 1992. And you looked at me like I was someone worth keeping alive." In return, Grace kept her promise to always tell the truth. "This world doesn't hand you dignity," she told them. "You have to plant it, water it, and fight to protect it like a garden that's only ever yours." By her 63rd birthday, Grace had become more than a viral story. She had become a symbol, not of perfection, but of possibility. One night after a gala where she'd accepted a national honor for civic leadership, she and Thomas sat on the veranda, watching stars scatter across the night sky. "You always had this in you," he said softly. "It just took the world too long to see it." Grace reached over and took his hand. "I think," she said, "it took me too long to see it." And together they sat in the quiet, not as saviors or statues, but as two people who had been broken and rebuilt, not by fate, but by choice. It began with a voicemail. Grace Anderson had just finished a long meeting at the Foundation's new outreach hub when her phone buzzed in her purse. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, thinking it was another media inquiry. When she finally checked it, the voice that crackled through the speaker stopped her in her tracks. "Mom, it's Daniel. Can you call me back? It's urgent, please." There was something brittle in his tone. It wasn't the usual distracted son, full of boardroom buzzwords and surface-level warmth. No, this was something closer to the voice she hadn't heard in years. The boy who used to cry when his bicycle chain broke. The young man who held her hand when his father passed. Grace stared at the screen for a long time before pressing delete. Not out of cruelty, out of instinct. She needed space to think and breathe. 2 days passed. Then came Vanessa unannounced. She showed up at the Hartwell Foundation's main building dressed in muted colors that didn't suit her. No designer coat, no stiletto heels. Just a woman who looked more like a storm had dragged her in than a car. The receptionist was halfway through asking if she had an appointment when Grace appeared at the top of the stairs. Their eyes met. Vanessa blinked, hesitating. Grace didn't. She walked down slowly, gracefully, like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. "Vanessa," she said softly, "you look different." Vanessa let out a sound that was half chuckle, half sob. "We lost everything." Grace said nothing. Vanessa stepped forward, voice trembling. "Daniel, he invested in some tech project. A startup. Promised returns, flashy presentations. It was a scam. They took the money and ran. He's being investigated now for negligence. Investors are suing him. Our accounts are frozen." Grace's expression didn't shift. "We had to sell the house." Vanessa continued, her hands wringing. "The cars, jewelry, even the kids' savings. We're in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side. I didn't know who else to come to." Grace paused, looked past her. The lobby was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, painting golden lines across the marble floor. It was a far cry from the night she had stood outside her son's house in the pouring rain, coughing through a fever with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph. And yet the silence between them felt familiar. "Where are the children?" Grace asked. Vanessa sniffled. "At school. They miss you. Lily keeps drawing pictures of you. Ben asks if you're still mad." Mad. Mad was too small a word for what Grace had been, for the slow, silent devastation she'd carried in her chest like broken glass. But now, months later, she didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. "Come with me," Grace said. Vanessa followed her into a small side conference room. Glass walls, comfortable chairs, privacy. Grace sat. Vanessa hesitated before doing the same. There was a moment, just one, where Vanessa's shoulders collapsed. Her face softened, and Grace thought maybe, just maybe, this was real. But it passed. "What do you need from me?" Grace asked. Vanessa blinked. "Help. I know we don't deserve it, but Daniel's facing charges. The lawyers want a retainer. We're trying to pay back what we can. The kids need stability. They need school, food, a future. You need money." "I need help," Vanessa corrected a bit too quickly. Grace leaned forward, hands folded in her lap, calm, steady. "I want you to understand something," she said. "The night you threw me out when I had nothing, you didn't just abandon me. You erased me, like I was an inconvenience, like I was a coat you could hang by the door and forget." Vanessa's eyes flickered. "I was scared. I was angry. You were comfortable," Grace cut in, "and my presence made you uncomfortable." Silence. "I came to your house to be part of a family," Grace continued. "Instead, I became the hired help. Except I wasn't hired. I was used. And when I got sick, you didn't see a person. You saw a problem." Vanessa's lip trembled. "I was wrong." Grace nodded. "Yes, you were. I'm sorry." "I believe you." Relief flickered across Vanessa's face, but only for a second. Grace's eyes didn't soften. "I believe you're sorry for what happened to you, not for what you did to me." Vanessa flinched. "You think bringing me the children's names will move me? That invoking Lily and Ben will bend me back into the shadow of who I used to be?" "I didn't mean—" Grace raised a hand. "I am still your mother-in-law," she said. "I am still Daniel's mother. That will never change." Then slowly she stood. "But I am no longer the shadow you get to walk over." Her voice rang like a bell, low, clear, undeniable. Vanessa's mouth parted, closed, opened again. "Please," she whispered, "just talk to Daniel. He needs you." Grace stared at her for a long time, then she nodded. "Tomorrow," she said. 10 a.m. He can meet me here." Vanessa stood too quickly, as if hope had grabbed her by the wrist and yanked her upright. Grace didn't offer a hug or a handshake. She simply watched her leave. The next morning, Daniel arrived. He looked smaller, not in stature, but in presence. His suit hung off him like armor he no longer knew how to wear. He stood in the same conference room his wife had occupied the day before, eyes down, hands shaking. "Hi, Mom." Grace didn't reply. "I don't know what to say." She let the silence sit between them. Finally, he spoke again. "I screwed up. I should have listened to you, to my instincts. I thought money would make things right. I thought ambition was enough." He looked up, eyes glassy. "I thought you'd always be there. And then when you weren't, I saw what I did." Grace nodded slowly. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I'm not here to punish you, but I won't erase what happened. I don't expect you to. I needed your protection once," she said, "and you gave me silence." "I know." She took a breath. "So now I will give you what you gave me." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "Distance." His face fell. "I'm not cutting you off," Grace said. "I'm not shutting the door. But I'm not opening it all the way either. If you want a relationship with me, with my life now, it'll be earned, not inherited." Tears slid down Daniel's cheeks. "I miss you," he whispered. "I miss the son who saw me," she replied. He nodded. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. "What's this?" "From Lily," he said. "She wrote it for school. Said she wished Grandma would come to her art show. She didn't know what happened, only that you were gone." Grace took the letter with shaking fingers. That night, alone in her room, she read it. "Dear Grandma, I miss your stories. I miss your tea. I miss how you made the rain feel like a song and how your hugs smelled like books. Are you mad? I hope not. I drew a picture of you and me under the orange tree. I'll hang it on my wall until you come home. Love, Lily." Grace pressed the paper to her heart and cried not for what she had lost, but for what she might still rebuild. The next day she wrote back, "Dear Lily, I'm not mad. I'm growing something new now, but orange trees remember, and so do grandmothers. Tell your brother to water the garden. Tell your father to call me next Tuesday. Tell your mother. Tell her I hope she's learning. I love you, Grandma." The storm had passed, but something still stirred beneath the surface. Grace Anderson sat alone in her office at the Hartwell Foundation's headquarters, a manila folder open in front of her. The contents were unexpected: a printed financial audit screenshots of email trails, copies of legal filings she hadn't asked for but couldn't stop reading. It had started as a simple request. After Daniel's visit and the sobering letter from Lily, Grace had asked the Foundation's legal team to do a quiet internal review of the company collapse her son had fallen victim to. Not for vengeance, not to build a case, just clarity. She needed to understand what had happened, where it had all gone so wrong. But what they found wasn't carelessness, it was calculation. And the name at the center of it all wasn't Daniel's, it was Vanessa's. Grace stared at the digital signature on the fake contract that had supposedly secured funding for a non-existent software startup, authorized by Vanessa L. Anderson. At first she thought it was a mistake, but the deeper the team dug, the clearer it became. Vanessa had orchestrated a shell transaction under Daniel's name, using her position as financial liaison in his company to reroute investor funds into dummy accounts. Then, when it all collapsed, she'd stepped back, let the house of cards fall, and watched her husband take the blame. The realization landed like a weight on Grace's chest. She wasn't just manipulative, she wasn't just cold, she was dangerous. Grace picked up the phone and dialed a number she'd only used twice before. "Mr. Hartwell," she said when Thomas answered, "I need your help." He didn't ask why, he simply said, "Come over." An hour later, Grace sat across from him in the study of the estate, the file now resting between them. Thomas read in silence, brows furrowed, mouth drawn into a tight line. "This is enough to trigger a full criminal inquiry," he said. Grace nodded. "Can you make that happen?" Discreetly. He looked up. "Do you want her arrested?" Grace hesitated. "I want the truth to stand up," she said, "even if my son can't." Thomas tapped his fingers together. "I'll speak to a friend at the District Financial Task Force. If they move on this, it'll move fast." And it did. 3 days later, federal agents launched a formal investigation. 2 more after that, they arrived at Vanessa and Daniel's temporary apartment with warrants. Grace wasn't there when they showed up, but she received a call that evening from Daniel. His voice was broken like gravel under pressure. "She used my name," he said. "Every signature, every wire transfer. She forged some, manipulated others. The firm is pressing criminal charges, and she didn't even flinch." Grace listened, silent. "I didn't see it," Daniel whispered. "I should have seen it. I thought she was just ambitious. But she lied. To me, to our investors, to the kids." His voice cracked. "She ruined everything." Grace closed her eyes, feeling a dull ache spread from her temples to her chest. The kind of pain that wasn't sharp or sudden but old, familiar, like scar tissue reopening. "Where is she now?" she asked. "Jail," he said hollowly. "They denied bail." She nodded even though he couldn't see it. Daniel exhaled. "I didn't know who else to call." Grace held the phone tighter. "I'm here," she said, "but I can't fix this for you." "I know," he replied. "I don't deserve you to." The line went silent. Later that night, Thomas came into her office with a steaming cup of tea and found her sitting motionless, staring at the window. "It's not justice that hurts," she murmured. "It's that it took this long." Thomas sat beside her. He was blind. He chose to be. They were quiet for a long time. Then Grace whispered almost to herself, "She used my son, and he let her." And now Grace turned her gaze toward the moonlight streaming through the curtains. "Now I mourn what I thought I had." The next morning, news broke. Vanessa Anderson, former CFO of Anderson Realty, arrested for orchestrating a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme, charged with identity theft, wire fraud, financial misrepresentation. Her photo made the front page, still composed, still polished, but her eyes betrayed the truth. No regret, only defiance. The media circled Daniel too, but Thomas used his pull to keep most of them at bay. Daniel issued a statement that afternoon. I was deceived. I am cooperating fully with the authorities. I am devastated for those affected. Grace read it over coffee, then tucked it away. That evening, Daniel came to see her. He looked like a man unraveling at the seams. He stood at the front gate of the estate for a long time, unsure whether he'd even be let in. When Grace finally appeared, he didn't speak. He didn't offer apologies or excuses. He simply sat on the bench near the herb garden and stared at the rosemary bushes she had revived months before. I loved her, he said. Grace sat beside him, hands folded. I believed in her, he continued. I thought maybe she was cold, maybe she was tough, but I thought she was loyal. I thought she was mine. Grace looked at her son, really looked. The man who had once handed her a cup of tea when she couldn't get out of bed after his father's funeral. The boy who used to draw superheroes with her initials on their capes. She reached out and placed her hand over his. She saw what you needed, Grace said quietly, and she fed it to you like a poison dressed as praise. Daniel's eyes welled. He shook his head. I should have stood up for you, he whispered. The night I let her throw you out, I became someone I can't even look in the mirror anymore. Grace's voice was soft. Do you see me now? He nodded. I'm not here to punish you, she said, but I won't walk backward into your life. He swallowed. Do you hate me? She thought about that. No, she said. I hurt for you, but hate no. That would mean I expected better. And the truth is, I stopped expecting anything from you a long time ago. Daniel's face crumpled. She didn't comfort him. Some grief had to be carried. Later that night, alone in her room, Grace sat at her writing desk and opened her journal. She wrote a single sentence, the truth burns, but it cleanses. She let the pen rest and stared out at the sky. Outside, the estate grounds were still. The herb garden bathed in moonlight. The world hadn't ended. It had simply changed shape. The woman who had once been discarded like a threadbare coat was now the one who held her family's last fragile threads in her hands. She hadn't asked for power, but she had learned how to wield it with silence, with patience, with an unwavering eye for what mattered. The tears came quietly, not in a flood, but in steady drops. Not for Vanessa, not even for Daniel, but for the version of herself that had once believed loyalty required submission. That love meant staying silent, that motherhood demanded erasure. She mourned that woman tonight, and in doing so she let her go. The knock on Grace Anderson's door came just past 7 in the evening. She had been journaling, curled into the old armchair near the window, a mug of chamomile cooling in her hand. The knock wasn't urgent or sharp. It was hesitant, gentle in a way that only a child knocking on their mother's door could be. She knew who it was before she even rose. When she opened the door, Daniel stood on the other side, the collar of his coat dusted with fog. His hands were stuffed in his pockets. His eyes carried a weight she recognized too well, the quiet torment of a man who'd walked through fire and wasn't sure if he'd made it out. He didn't speak immediately, and neither did she. Then slowly he took a breath. His voice cracked on the first word. Mom. Her heart trembled. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know I've said it before, but I mean it now in a way I didn't even understand then. I was blind. I was weak. I let my pride speak louder than your pain. Grace watched him, her face unreadable. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, stepping closer. I miss you. A silence stretched between them. Then for the first time in nearly a year, Daniel stepped forward, and this time he didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her, not loosely, not performatively, tightly, like a son who'd come home from war. And Grace, without needing permission, wrapped her arms around him. She didn't say, I told you so. She didn't say, finally. She simply breathed in the scent of her child's grief and held him. When they parted, tears streaked both of their faces. I don't deserve you, Daniel said softly. No, Grace replied, her voice calm. But you're still my son. He let out a sob, and for a while he sat on her couch while she warmed the tea again. They didn't speak of Vanessa. They didn't speak of the trial, the scandal, the shame. They spoke, instead of Lily's art, of Ben's science project, of the future, not the wreckage. Daniel looked around her modest room. The wooden furniture, the vases of fresh herbs, the computer she'd learned to master, the walls lined with thank you cards and photographs from her outreach programs. This is your world now, he said. Grace nodded. It is. And where do I fit into it, he asked. Grace considered the question. You don't have to fit, she said. Not yet. Maybe not ever the way you used to, but you're welcome to walk beside it if you earn the steps. He understood. She reached for a folder on the table and handed it to him. Inside was a proposal. The Grace Initiative was launching a new program, one she had quietly developed over the past few months. It was called Awakened Mothers, designed for women over 50 who had been left behind by society, by children, by circumstance, mothers who had been housewives, caregivers, quiet laborers behind the scenes, who now needed skills, resources, and strength to build lives of their own, self-sustaining, empowered, seen. Is this? Daniel began. It's based on me, Grace said, and hundreds of others I've met since. Women who were erased before anyone realized they were ever there. He ran his hand along the pages. The scope was ambitious. Financial literacy workshops, mental health services, job placement, community housing, even digital skills training. You built this, Grace smiled. With help, with fire, and with every ounce of the silence I once swallowed. Daniel swallowed hard. It's beautiful, he said. It's needed. I'd like you to be a part of it, Grace said. He looked up startled. Me? Not leading, not at the top, she clarified. But there's a space in the coordination wing. Logistics, outreach management. You've made mistakes, but you've also learned. And I believe redemption is built through usefulness, not apologies. Daniel blinked, stunned. I'll do anything, he said. Whatever you need. I want to make this right. Grace looked at him. Then start by showing up, she said. Not for me, for them. 3 weeks later, Daniel began his training under the guidance of the Hartwell Foundation's community leads. He started at the bottom, managing schedules, updating databases, hauling boxes of supplies. And for the first time in his adult life, he didn't complain. He listened. He learned. And slowly the staff began to accept him, not as Grace's son, but as Daniel, the volunteer, who showed up early, stayed late, and never used his last name as currency. Meanwhile, Grace traveled across counties, hosting town hall events, launching the first Awakened Mothers pilot in a small town devastated by factory closures. 40 women enrolled in the first month, 80 by the second. She watched them grow, gray-haired women laughing while learning how to send emails. Grandmothers starting catering businesses from their kitchens. Widows leading yoga classes in converted libraries. One of them, a 62-year-old named Margaret, told Grace, "For the first time, I don't feel like my life is behind me. I feel like it's in front." Grace wrote that down in her journal that night. Later, in a board meeting with Thomas Hartwell and his executive team, she proposed doubling the program's funding. "I don't want this to be a project," she said. "I want it to be a movement." Thomas grinned. "Then let's make it one." And they did. Months passed. Daniel continued to grow, taking courses in nonprofit management, shadowing regional leads. Grace watched from afar, not hovering but observing, letting his work, not his words, shape her view. Then came the day he stood in front of a room full of new male volunteers, many of them men his own age, sons of the very women Grace was helping, and said, "My mother taught me that love is not about comfort. It's about seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. I failed at that once. I won't fail again." When Grace heard those words, she didn't cry. She simply smiled, because for the first time Daniel had chosen to grow up not for reward but for reconciliation. That night, as she walked through the herb garden under the stars, Grace stopped beneath the orange tree she'd planted the year before. The fruit hung low and heavy. She reached up, picked one, and peeled it slowly, the citrus bursting fresh and fragrant under her fingers. She sat on the bench beside the tree and looked out over the hills. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It wasn't forgetting. It was choosing peace over pride, truth over vengeance, hope over control. She had chosen it not to mend the past, but to free the future, her future, and that more than anything was the gift no one could take from her again. The little house by the sea stood at the edge of the world. Nestled just beyond the cliffs of Seacliff Bay, it faced the horizon with quiet defiance, whitewashed walls kissed by salt air windows framed in sky-blue shutters, and a terracotta roof that soaked in the golden sun like a blessing. Grace Anderson arrived with only 3 suitcases and a promise to herself. No more living for others, no more shadows, no more silences that swallowed her whole. This was her chapter, and she would write it with both hands open. The cottage had once belonged to a retired painter. It had a sunroom full of ivy and chipped pottery, a narrow winding staircase that creaked with every step, and a tiny porch wrapped in wind chimes and morning glories. Grace adored it instantly. She painted the front door sage green. She named her new golden retriever Hero after a novel she loved as a girl. She planted marigolds along the fence lavender by the kitchen window, and basil in little pots that clung to the balcony rail like green prayers. Each morning she rose with the tide waking at 5, stepping barefoot into the dew-covered grass, the sky still gray and trembling with dawn. She'd stretch on the porch, her yoga mat unfurled like a canvas, arms raised to greet the sun that slowly emerged from the sea's embrace. Then she'd sit, eyes closed, breath steady. And for the first time in her life, Grace felt not useful, not necessary, not needed. Just whole. She began painting again. At first it was small petals, waves light through trees. But soon the canvases grew larger, bolder. She painted women dancing barefoot in fields, elderly hands sowing seeds into golden soil, a mother staring at her reflection with awe, not shame. The local gallery offered her a corner wall. A week later they gave her a solo exhibit, but it was her writing that sparked something else entirely. She started a blog called The Awakening Chair, named after the old wicker chair where she wrote by the window, Hero asleep at her feet. Her first post was short. I've been a daughter, a wife, a mother, a shadow. I've been a hand that served, a back that bent, a heart that broke. I am all those things, and now I am also a beginning. She pressed publish with trembling fingers. By sunset it had 2,000 views. By the next morning, 10,000. By the end of the week the blog had crashed from traffic. Letters poured in. Women from all corners of the country wrote to her, some in caps, some in whispers, saying thank you. I thought I was too old to matter. I thought starting over was for the young. I thought I'd die unseen. Grace read each message slowly, often aloud, letting the words land gently on the air. She replied to as many as she could. Others she carried in her journal. Then came the live streams. It started on a whim. Her assistant at the foundation had suggested it. Just talk to them, the girl said, like you do to us, but look into the camera. So she did. Every Sunday morning, Grace opened her laptop, adjusted the soft lighting by her window, and clicked Go Live. She spoke for 30 minutes, sometimes more, about grief, about resilience, about the day she walked away from the life that no longer saw her and built a new one flower, one breath, one brave moment at a time. She cried once when reading a letter from an 83-year-old woman who left an abusive home and was living in her car while taking coding lessons. She laughed when telling the story of how Hero once stole her paintbrush and buried it in the garden. She quoted books, poems, even old kitchen recipes. Everything, it seemed, could be a kind of gospel when spoken with truth. Then one morning she looked straight into the lens and said, "You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done. You are just waiting to believe in yourself again." The quote went viral. By nightfall it was posted across every platform, painted on mugs, stitched into bookmarks, printed on posters in classrooms and cafes. But it was one particular post that caught fire. You're never too old to start over unless you've stopped believing in yourself. That sentence lit a match in thousands. She didn't mean it to inspire a movement, but it did. One morning as she was walking Hero along the shoreline, a young woman jogging by skidded to a stop. "You're her," the woman panted. "You're Grace." Grace smiled. "Some days, yes. I watch your streams every week. I left my job last month. I'm opening a bookstore. Because of you." Grace paused, touched. "I didn't do that," she said. "You did." The woman beamed. "But you made me brave enough to try." And that, Grace thought, was the greatest miracle of her later life. Not fame, not validation, not redemption, but reflection. To become a mirror where other women saw themselves as worthy again. Later that year, Grace was asked to deliver the keynote at the National Women's Leadership Summit. She declined the hotel suite. Instead, she took the train, brought her own tea, wore a dress she'd sewn herself. On the stage in front of thousands, she looked calm, unshaken, like the sea itself had whispered strength into her bones. She began her speech with a laugh. "Some people think I became a new person," she said. "I didn't. I just came home to the one I always was. Applause thundered, but she raised her hand. And listen, don't wait until 60 to find her. Don't wait until the roof caves in, until the door slams, until you're standing in the rain with a suitcase. Wake up now. She paused, then delivered her final words, the ones that would be quoted, remembered, carved into stone someday. Freedom isn't a place you go. It's the moment you decide you deserve to arrive. Back at the cottage that night, Grace poured herself a glass of red wine and stepped onto the porch. The sea shimmered silver beneath the moonlight. Hero barked softly at the waves. Grace laughed, curled into her chair, and opened her journal. She began to write, not about pain, not about the past, but about possibility, and peace, and love that didn't have to be earned. The applause rolled over her like a wave, steady, thunderous, and warm. Grace Anderson stood beneath the towering lights of the National Women's Leadership Summit stage, the gold banner behind her shimmering with the words Inspirational Woman of the Year. She wasn't used to spotlights, not years ago. But tonight she didn't flinch. Her silver hair caught the stage glow like a crown. Her spine held upright by more than poise. It was held by every silent morning she endured, every night she walked alone, every tear that dried without witness. The MC called her name again and she stepped forward. As she walked to the podium, 1,000 women rose to their feet. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Some held signs, still becoming at 60 plus. Grace taught me to begin again. Mother, leader, light. Grace smiled, not because she needed validation, because they saw her now, truly saw her. When the room calmed, she leaned slightly into the microphone and said, I used to think I was invisible, but maybe I just hadn't stepped into the light yet. The crowd exhaled like a prayer. She told them stories, not all triumphant, not all neat, some messy, some painful, but all true. She spoke of second chances, of dignity reclaimed, of choosing not to return to cages just because they're familiar. And she ended with this, I hold no anger. I hold no hate. But I will never again abandon myself in the name of belonging. From now on, I live for me. The standing ovation was long, some would say endless. But Grace didn't let the applause swell her head. Instead, that night back in her hotel room, she sat barefoot on the bed, Hero curled at her feet, sipping tea in silence. She opened her phone and scrolled through the messages that had poured in since her speech. Hundreds. Thousands. Then she saw one buried in the list but marked with a small star. It was from a name she hadn't seen in months. Lily, her granddaughter. The message read, Hi, Grandma. It's Lily. Dad said it's okay to text you now. I miss you. I miss your voice and your garden and the way you say darling like I'm special. I saw you on TV. You looked like a queen. Can we visit you? I'll be good. I'll help you plant stuff. Please say yes. I miss you so much. Grace sat still for a long time, rereading the message over and over again. She pressed a hand to her chest and whispered, Oh, Lily. The next day she sent a reply. Darling, you never have to be perfect for me to love you. I'd love to see you. Bring your smile and your little brother. And tell your dad. He doesn't have to ask for forgiveness. Just come honest. 2 weeks later, a dusty SUV pulled into the gravel path outside her seaside cottage. Hero barked once alert. Grace stepped out onto the porch in her woven sandals, a wide-brimmed sun hat shading her eyes. The door of the SUV opened. Lily jumped out first, gangly taller, now her arms full of a bouquet of wildflowers and a sketch pad. Grandma! Grace barely had time to brace herself before the girl barreled into her arms. You smell like lavender, Lily whispered into her neck. That's because I live like lavender now. Grace laughed softly, squeezing her tight. Ben emerged next, awkward and shy, his fingers twisting the hem of his t-shirt. Grace knelt. Hi, love, she said. Do you still remember how to water basil? He grinned. Only if I don't have to eat it. She pulled him into a hug, too. Then came Daniel. He stepped out slower. No sunglasses. No pretense. Just a father who looked like he was visiting someone holy. Hi, Mom. Hello, son. He glanced at the porch, at the herbs, the wind chimes, the easel by the window. It's beautiful, he said. It's mine, she answered gently. They all sat on the porch later, drinking iced tea and nibbling lemon cookies Lily had helped make. The children ran through the garden, chasing Hero, giggling as they leapt over the beds of marigolds and mint. Daniel watched them, then turned to Grace. "I know this doesn't undo anything," he said, "but thank you for letting us come." She studied him. The lines on his face were deeper, but so was the humility in his gaze. "I don't live in the past anymore," she said, "but I remember it. Every detail. That's how I stay whole." He nodded slowly. "I'll never ask you to come back," he said. "I just want you to know you were always the best part of home." Tears sprang to her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she reached over and placed her hand gently over his. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I don't hold revenge, and I don't carry bitterness, but I won't return to a life that asked me to disappear." He nodded again, this time with peace in his eyes. "I don't want you to," he said. "I just want you to know I see you now." That night after they left, Grace sat on her porch alone. The stars were diamonds scattered across navy velvet. The sea whispered lullabies. Hero snored beside her. She sipped from a mug that read "Still Becoming." Then slowly she opened her laptop. The live stream countdown ticked down 3, 2, 1. Her face appeared on screen. She looked radiant, not glamorous, not rehearsed, just deeply soulfully alive. "Hello, friends," she said warmly. "Tonight, I want to talk about returning not to old lives, but to truth. I've been reminded recently that forgiveness is not an invitation to be hurt again. It's a choice to heal and walk forward, even if the past still echoes." She paused, and then she smiled. "You are allowed to change. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to become your own home." Her voice softened. "And when people see you, truly see you, they'll meet you where you are. Not who you were, but who you are becoming." That night across the country, mothers, daughters, grandmothers, and women who had never worn titles at all sat in front of laptops and phones and televisions. They listened to her voice like a balm. Some cried, some wrote, some simply sat in silence, letting the truth settle in their bones. And in the stillness of the night, one woman stood older perhaps than she felt, and whispered to her own reflection in the mirror, "I am not finished." The sky was painted with fire. Streaks of crimson and gold unfurled across the horizon, bleeding into the sea, as if the sun itself had leaned down to kiss the water goodbye. Waves rolled in with a hush, folding gently into the sand, like whispers from another life. Grace Anderson walked barefoot along the shoreline, each step sinking softly into damp earth, each breath slow and full. The air carried the scent of salt and hibiscus. Her white linen shawl fluttered behind her like a forgotten flag now rediscovered. Hero trotted a few feet ahead, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still close. His golden fur glowed in the dying light, and his tail moved like a metronome, keeping time with the tide. Grace paused and closed her eyes. For the first time in her 71 years, she felt no obligation pressing on her shoulders. No need to prove anything. No one asking for her silence, no past clinging like a shadow. Just the ocean, and breath, and light. She opened her eyes when she heard footsteps approaching through the sand. Not hurried, not unsure. Just steady. She turned. Elliot. He smiled, a little wind-blown, a little sun-kissed hands in his pockets, a thin scarf looped around his neck. He always looked like he belonged in moments like this, where nature felt like a cathedral, and time stood still long enough for the soul to speak. "You always come here at this hour?" he asked, voice low. Grace nodded. "It reminds me I'm alive." He fell into step beside her without asking. They walked in silence for a while, letting the waves do the talking. The soft hush of sea foam, the gentle pull of tide. The occasional bark from Hero chasing a gull too bold for its own good. Elliot was the kind of presence that didn't fill a room so much as steady it. They'd met during the early months of the Awakened Mothers Initiative. He'd been a quiet donor at first, then a strategic advisor. He had a background in crisis intervention, had worked in refugee programs, and had the kind of gentle eyes that made people say too much and feel safe doing it. Over time, Grace began to look forward to their phone calls, then their walks, then their silences. She didn't know when it shifted from companionship to something deeper, but she knew the moment she allowed it. It was the night he stayed after a late meeting and helped her clean up plates without being asked. When he saw the old scar on her wrist from when she fell in the garden, and instead of asking, he just held her hand for a moment. That kind of quiet understanding was something Grace had never known in a man before. Not like this. Now as they walked, he reached for her hand without ceremony. Their fingers laced together like they'd done it forever. She let out a small breath she didn't know she was holding. "You ever think," Elliot began, "that maybe we don't start life until we've learned how to live it?" Grace glanced sideways. "That sounds suspiciously like a quote you read in one of your coffee shop books." He grinned. "Probably." She nudged him gently with her shoulder. "But it's true. I look at you," he said, "and I see someone who built a whole world after everyone expected her to disappear." She didn't blush. She simply looked out at the sea, watching the sun dip lower, spilling light like honey. "I think we all disappear a little," she said softly. "Some of us for years, some for decades. But the magic isn't in being seen again, it's in seeing yourself again." Elliot nodded. Then he stopped walking. She turned to face him. He took both her hands, now held them in front of her chest, firm but warm. "I know you've spent your life giving," he said. "To a husband who couldn't stay, to a son who didn't see you, to a world that asked you to shrink so others could feel big." She didn't flinch. "But Grace," he said, voice low and steady, "have you ever been loved by someone who asked for nothing but your presence?" The wind shifted. Her hair moved across her cheek. She stared at him, and for the first time in her long, storied life, she said the thing that felt like both confession and revelation. "I don't know what that feels like," she whispered. Elliot leaned closer. "Then let me show you." They stood there wrapped in golden hour, the surf clapping softly at their feet. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. She simply squeezed his hand, and they kept walking. Later at home, Grace lit a candle in her sunroom and sat with her journal. Hero curled beneath the table. The ocean murmured in the background, constant and calm. She opened to the last page. Her handwriting was steady now, confident. She wrote, "The story they told me was that women my age were meant to fade. The story I lived was different. I burned, I healed, I spoke, I forgave. I grew wild, I grew free. I loved myself most of all." Then she smiled and closed the book. Outside, the stars were rising. Inside, her heart was too. And somewhere in the distance, the waves whispered the truth that took her a lifetime to learn. She had always been more than enough.